I want to welcome everybody today. And before I turn things over to Bob, I want to remind everyone that 2023 is not an off year. There are elections in Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. If you vote in one of these states, please request your absentee ballot today at votefromabroad.org. Every vote counts. And with that, I will turn it over to Bob Vallier. Welcome.
Okay, hi. Thanks, Bob Vallier here. In America, we say Bob Vallier. Rhymes with queer. Never heard that before in my life. But welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We appreciate you celebrating Pride Month with us. I am Bob Vallier. I'm the chair of the Democrats Abroad LGBTQ Caucus. And I was just a few minutes ago at the Paris Pride Parade. And now I'm back home, but I'm wearing my collector's item Say Gay t-shirt from last year in Amsterdam for Canal Pride. We're going to do it again next year. Maybe, Senator, you can come next year. That would be great if you could. But I wanted to thank you, Senator, for spending Pride with us and to introduce our new international chair, Martha McDevitt Pugh, who will introduce you properly. Among many other things, Martha used to be the chair, the founding chair, in fact, of this very caucus. So I'm delighted that her first global event as chair is this one, which we're now calling the third annual Senator Tammy Baldwin Joins Us for Pride event. Martha has also served in many capacities in Democrats Abroad, including as one of our representatives to the DNC, which she continues to do as chair. We're all very excited that she's going to be leading Democrats Abroad through our global presidential primary and into the 2024 election year. And I'm full of pride to introduce my good friend, global chair, Martha McDevitt Pugh.
Thank you so very much, Bob. And I'm delighted to introduce Senator Tammy Baldwin. She is a junior U.S. Senator from Wisconsin, and she's committed her life's work to public service, fighting for fairness, equality, and opportunity, because she believes that with each passing year and each generation, our country must become more equal, not less. In 1998, Senator Baldwin was elected as Wisconsin's first female member of Congress and the nation's first openly LGBTQ challenger sent to Congress. In 2012, she became the first woman from Wisconsin to serve in the Senate and the first openly LGBTQ senator ever elected. And we're very grateful. I want to take this opportunity to thank Senator Baldwin from the bottom of our hearts for her bipartisan leadership, which led to the historic passage of the Respect for Marriage Act last December, legislation that is so important for all of us living abroad. And this legislation was needed to protect the rights of LGBTQ plus families, which had been decided at the Supreme Court and still needed to be enshrined in law. And these protections matter so much to our community and allies and to those of us abroad. So the rights of citizenship and family reunification matter to Americans abroad, and the Respect for Marriage Act was a huge win for all of us. So please join us today in welcoming the Senator Baldwin. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And I so appreciate that introduction, Martha. And Bob, also, thank you for playing a role in convening Democrats Abroad, and particularly for this LGBTQ Pride. I wanted just to reflect, as I do during Pride Month. We still have several days left to observe, what it is that I think of at such times, but also recognizing that just like so many other things that we select a month for Pride, but we need to be thinking about the movement and progress every month of the year, and our work needs to happen every month of the year. And I also want to just give a shout out. I understand we have also some Wisconsin Democrats Abroad who have joined. So a special shout out to Wisconsinites Whether you're part of the LGBTQ community or just a vocal ally, welcome, welcome. I also will note with a little bit of amusement that June is also Dairy Month and Dairy Pride Month in Wisconsin. So we have double pride that we celebrate in our state, and that's always a lot of fun. But anyways, seriously, when I think about why we celebrate Pride, being on the anniversary of the Stonewall riots, and recognizing that very violent set of events set upon a course of what we recognize as sort of the modern gay civil rights movement, LGBTQ plus civil rights movement. But we trace its origins to that. Not that there weren't things before Stonewall, as the documentary reminds us that were very powerful. But I like to start by recognizing the founders of the movement and all that they risked, the courage they showed, the inspiration that they gave to generations that followed, because we stand on their shoulders and we know that. I also, like to trace some of the challenges, the struggles, the progress we've made. I think a lot about, when I first ran for office, which wasn't for the House or the Senate, it was for the Dane County Board of Supervisors at the tender age of 24, right out of college. And I remember thinking back to that 24-year-old who was literally grappling with the idea of, I could live out or I could run for office, but I fear I can't do both. And I was so fortunate to have some local role models who had done both and who had won, who said, you can do both and you can win. And I did. But I wasn't the first back then. I have all these firsts ahead of me. But back then, Dick Wagner and Kathleen Nichols on the Dane County Board of Supervisors, an out lesbian and an out gay man, said, you can do this. And their example helped give me the courage to try it. Back then, we used to gather annually a small group of people who are out and had successfully been elected to office. The first time I attended such a group was in 1986. And there were about 14 of us in attendance. And then we counted up the people who had been invited that we knew about, who were out and holding office, who didn't come to our confab. And we counted about 24 internationally. 24 out gay and lesbian elected officials. And there weren't any transgender that we knew of at that time in 1986. And that group functioned more as a support group than it did a professional networking organization. But I can assure you that today, when the successor of that group gathers, we now have over 1,000 out LGBTQ elected officials in the United States and more globally. And so it's changing, and that's progress. I also think about my time in public office and getting to the Congress at a time when, other than the Hate Crime Statistics Act, there had been no bill passed that had the words sexual orientation or gender identity in our federal statutes. And the Hate Crime Statistics Act, which predated my coming to Congress, basically was, very important, but it asked local units of law enforcement to collect statistics on hate crimes against people on the basis of race, ethnicity, gender, and so that act added sexual orientation and gender identity to what we were asking them to collect, and it was voluntary collection of data. And so we were getting a little bit of a glimpse of what was really happening in America with regard to hate crimes against our community. But it wasn't until after the horrible and horrendous hate crime against Matthew Shepard and others against James Byrd and people with disabilities, that we were able to finally pass the Matthew Shepard, James Byrd hate crimes measure. And I'm going to tell you just a quick story of, I was in the House of Representatives when that was passed. I went to the signing ceremony when Obama signed it into law. And I had a person on my staff who was helping us sort of achieve digital status, like we can do a little video of your reaction to this. And we hadn't really figured that out beforehand. So anyways, there he is. He said, let's just tape a little recording of how you feel. And I said, oh my gosh, being in that room, watching President Obama sign the first measure ever to advance our protection and equality was amazing. And, we finished the taping, the video, and he said, I think you made a mistake, Congresswoman. You said this was the first ever. I think it was just the first that this president signed. And I said, no, it was the first ever. I went on to be able to celebrate the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. In the courts, to be able to celebrate the Obergefell decision in 2015. By then, I was in the Senate. And in Pride Month, I celebrate the March for Progress. But I want to say sternly, we can never confuse progress for victory. We have lots of work left to do. The Respect for Marriage Act was born out of the Dobbs decision, taking half of America back to having fewer rights than their parents and grandparents. And in that decision, as you all well know, there was a threat. We're now going after contraception access. We're now going after the Lawrence decision protecting intimate conduct between consenting adults. We're now going after marriage equality. We thought it was settled precedent, but we've realized that settled precedent is not settled in America anymore. And the Respect for Marriage Act was born out of that threat. And thank God we were able to, with my leadership, bring in enough Republicans in the Senate to overcome a filibuster and get that through to the president's desk. But we have such work to do. You're probably well aware, no matter where you are in the world right now, that we see a spike in violence against members of the LGBTQ plus community, and odious legislation and policies that are being pursued at the very local level, the state level, and at the federal level. And there's a particular harsh attack on our transgender brothers and sisters and our non-binary friends. And we have to push back. Let me just end by saying something that I also remember during Pride Month. And that was a lesson learned during the Respect for Marriage Act. It is the fact that we have been out, visible, proud, and vocal that has won the progress that we've seen. I could not have convinced 12 Republicans to join every Democrat on the Respect for Marriage Act if increasingly my Republican friends in the Senate did not know married couples, same-sex married couples, among their staff, in their extended family, maybe people they worship with at church or synagogue, maybe neighbors, but they can't say they don't know us anymore. And that's a result of all of your work and your visibility and your being vocal. In this new era, the same must become true about how we help the most vulnerable within our community. They're attacking trans children, and we cannot place the burden on their shoulders. I mean, there's some courageous and brave trans children who have spoken out and said, stop. But we adults have to be their voices, and to be visible on their behalf and to speak out on their behalf. That is how change comes about. And I learned that lesson in Respect for Marriage, and we need to make sure that that is what occurs in order to protect those who are on the front lines of this current wave of hate and division. So on that, so I want to be this, let's make it happy, let's make it light. It is our visibility and our voices that make change, and we have that power. Let's use it.
All right. Thank you so much, Senator Baldwin. We have a few questions for you. Our first question is from Bob.
Okay, so actually we have sort of three questions that fall under the same premise, let's call it. You can hear the church bells ringing behind me. Maybe celebrating gay pride. Our first three questions really have to do with the recently declared by the HRC state of emergency for LGBTQ rights. There are more than 600 bills in 41 states seeking to limit the rights of our community, and particularly trans people. So the first question sort of in that premise is, the state that's leading the charge on all of this hate legislation is Florida, and the chief enabler of that state, Governor DeSantis, is seeking the nomination of his party to be president. If Trump is in prison, it's not inconceivable that DeSantis could be the nominee and that his anti-queer agenda will be front and center of his national campaign. So what's the Democratic Party strategy, or better, what would you recommend it be for responding to this inevitable campaign theme over the next year?
Yeah, so I'd say a couple of things, and we're talking about winning elections, winning the presidency. I happen to be up for re-election next year and have announced my intent to run for re-election next year. So I'm very much thinking about what is the winning message for Democrats on the ballot next year. And it is certainly not to run away from the what's the premise of this question. But I think, when you're talking about winning elections, I think you have a narrative, and that has to do with being somebody who, in my case, listens, recognizes the challenges that my voters are facing, talks about solutions. And so I talk about a lot of kitchen table issues. And I often end with the power of, we also have to stand up to extremism and the things that people are doing to try to divert our attention from those kitchen table issues that keep you up at night, which may be the cost of things at the grocery store, or whether I can keep down a good paying job that can support my family and help me get ahead, or whether I can turn on my faucet and know that that is safe and clean drinking water, not contaminated. These are things that Wisconsinites think about, but part and parcel of talking about that is either telling the story of the passage of the Respect for Marriage Act, and how that was standing up to the extremists who are trying to divert your attention from what you should be looking to your elected officials to be championing, to be working on. And so I conclude that in sort of the whole narrative when I talk about it. And I think that that's a good approach to take. There is, you got to say that there's how do you say, you're losing when you're leading with the issue of don't say gay. That means you're not focusing a lot on economics of your state. You're not focusing a lot on how people can have affordable, high quality health care. You're not focusing on the things that your voters, but it's a very, we know Florida is a place lots of people go to retire. You should be championing protection of Medicare and Social Security. If you are talking about trans children or making abortion care illegal after 6 weeks, you are not focusing on your job. And I think we need to expose that.
Our next question is actually from me. You managed to get the Respect for Marriage Act passed into law last year, which was a major accomplishment. But is there anything else that can be done at the federal level to protect LGBTQ rights that are under attack everywhere? And what are the prospects of getting something done, even small things like the Illinois banned books ban? Or should we wait for the courts to intervene as they have on, for example, bans on drag?
Yeah, I think we always have to take an all of the above approach. And that means looking at what we can do legislatively. I serve in a legislative body, what we can count on or press a Democratic administration to do administratively through the agencies, what it is we can win in court or at least present a powerful case for, and what it is we even have to be thinking about at the nonpartisan level, which is typically the case for, people running for school board or city council, because these attacks are coming at all of these levels. And we need to be prepared and have a response at all of these levels. Now, by way of example, we're just talking about the attacks on our trans children. The Education Department under President Biden has articulated some guidance on Title IX. I'm not sure that everybody in the LGBTQ plus community would say it hit it, it's perfect, but boy, does it create some guardrails that would prevent some of the things we're seeing in school boards from following through, or at least it would at minimum give folks a really good case in court against, to turn back some of the things that have been happening at school boards across the country. So that's an example of administrative action. I certainly think, the biggest thing we could do at the federal level is pass the Equality Act, which creates new protections in employment, housing, education, public accommodations, credit, jury duty, and I'm missing one, and I can't think of what it is right now, but in any event, it's a bold Equality Act that includes all of those areas. We introduced it this past week, trying to get it in before the end of Pride Month. It also stands it would be very difficult to get the same 12 Republicans or another 12 Republicans that I was able to get on the Respect for Marriage Act on the Equality Act at this point in time. But we need it out there to use as an educational tool on the legislative, in the legislative branch. Also, I'll give you a much smaller slice, but something that I find is so important. I talk about our voices and our visibility. If we're not counted, it's easy to write us away, to not know or to not acknowledge. And sometimes when we're making our arguments against harmful policies, we lack the data we need to make the points we need to make. We know that there are high rates of suicide in the LGBTQ community, especially among our youth. We're not at this point able to make the causal connection between discrimination, harassment, and bullying and those tragedies. Surveys that are funded by the federal government often do not ask questions about sexual orientation or gender identity. So we can't necessarily present the evidence of things that we just know instinctively to be true. And so I just reintroduced a bill that I've carried for a long time, the LGBTQIA statistic or data collection bill that basically says if we're doing a federal survey, taxpayers are funding it, and it's relevant, that you should ask voluntarily for disclosure of sexual orientation or gender identity, so that we can actually name things that we know. This was born out of my days in the House of Representatives when I served on a health-related panel, and we'd have hearings on healthcare disparities. And I'd be able to ask experts and say, you know, what do we know about, say, maternal disparities in the among Black women? And boy, they had a lot of evidence, and we are still using that evidence to try to close these disparities. I'd say, what can you tell me about healthcare disparities among people in the LGBTQ community? And literally, there'd be a blank stare saying, we'll have to get back to you. Like, how can we not know these things? Because we don't count, we don't ask. And so that is something that under Democratic administrations, we've seen some voluntary efforts to collect more data, but we've also seen those dissipate in Republican administrations, and we need to collect the data. It's a small one. Maybe we can get something like that through. But and then we need to stand up against the attacks that are happening at the federal level at the same time they are at the state and local level.
Our next question is from Martha.
So following on that, actually, Senator Baldwin, the reason for the state of emergency is not only because of the sheer number of bills that are working their way through all the different state legislatures, but also because of the normalization of homophobia and transphobia that these are creating. Reports of increasingly violent incidents are really astounding. What can we do to prevent another Matthew Shepard?
Yeah, well, since the passage of the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Hate Crimes Act, you know, that act not only added sexual orientation, gender identity, and disability status and gender to our hate crimes laws, but it made another very important expansion that affected all communities under our federal hate crimes laws, and that is to broaden the circumstances where the federal government could intervene when we saw such violence and such hate crimes occurring. So prior to that, it was only when you were exercising a constitutionally protected right, like voting. So the federal government literally could only intervene prior to the passage of the Matthew Shepard, James Byrd Hate Crimes Act. You know, if somebody attacked you while you were voting or some other constitutionally protected activity. Now it's far more broad. And we need to, I think, heighten the visibility of those prosecutions and insist when it's a suspected hate crime that at the local level and the federal level, that those hate crimes penalty enhancers are brought to bear, that they're not plea dealed or, you know, that, and so we have, you know, if we believe that our criminal prosecutions and criminal laws are also supposed to be a deterrence as well as, you know, tools after the fact, we need to have higher visibility on how these tools are being used. I think that, again, we cannot be silent in the face of hate crimes, no matter what group it's targeting. And remember, the reason there are enhancements is because it might be a crime against one, but it is meant to send a reverberation throughout the community who shares the characteristics that you're next, and to create a sense of fear and terror. And so anyway, so as we see these, we need to make sure they rise to a higher level of scrutiny. And then I think we need to say, in cases where it doesn't rise to the level of a hate crime that can be prosecuted, that to say the accumulation of bullying and harassment and discriminatory laws also has the same sort of impact, and remind people who are promoting these laws that they are, that they are part of that greater harm.
Our next question is from the Progressive Caucus, who's co-sponsoring this event with us today.
Thank you, Progressive Caucus.
Our ProDA member that will be asking the question is Kaitlyn Kennedy. Kaitlyn, do you want to ask your question?
Hi, yes, I'm representing the Global Progressive Caucus, and we really want to thank you, Senator Baldwin, for being with us here today. And we also want to thank Bob, Martha, Angela, and everyone who's played a role in organizing this event. And our question is, in progressive circles, we talk a lot about the climate crisis and an economic bill of rights for citizens in the 21st century, including things like universal health care, the ERA, reparative justice, the transition to a renewable energy economy with clean air and water, and many other social infrastructure policies that poll very well with a wide range of demographic groups that typically favor the Democratic Party. These seem like elements of a winning strategy for Democrats. What accomplishments can Democrats already be proud of, and what must they accomplish now to demonstrate their commitment to achieving these kinds of goals and to winning the vote in 2024?
Oh, I love that question. And you give me the opportunity to reflect on some incredible victories. Of course, and remember I said sternly, do not mistake progress for victory. So let's talk about, we've made some incredible progress that we don't boast about enough. I don't know if we were all trained to be modest when we were growing up. I do not know where that comes from. The other side of the aisle seems to have no problem repeating a message over and over and over again, and we have such great achievements in the first 2 years of the Biden administration, when we had both houses of Congress. Well, it was a 50-50 split in the U.S. Senate, but we had Vice President Harris coming over to break those ties and help make that progress. The infrastructure legislation is helping America rebuild after decades and decades of neglect. It is creating new union, good-paying jobs, and it is not just focused on roads and bridges, which are very important, as we know, but it is bringing broadband to the unserved and those who can't afford broadband. It is bringing clean water and getting rid of the lead in the pipes and in water utilities, and helping to remediate PFAS contamination in waterways, water across America. And so, just that alone is so huge and making such a big impact. And, including, yes, I'm talking about roads and bridges, but when you talk about broadband, it's creating new economic and healthcare opportunities for folks who are just shut out because they didn't have that access to things like telehealth, or being able to run a small business that had a global market from a small town in northern Wisconsin that didn't have broadband. I mean, it just changed. It's a game changer in so many ways. But that wasn't enough. We followed on after that. Oh, wait, I forgot the American Rescue Plan before it, which helped deliver us through the dire situation that was the pandemic, helped keep afloat millions of small businesses and folks that were the first to have to close and the last to get to reopen. It was a lifeline with the child tax credit that lifted half of all children who were in poverty out of poverty for a period of time. We have to figure out a way to restore the child tax credit. After a string of horrendous acts of gun violence, we passed a modest but really important bill called the Safer Communities Act to help crack down on gun violence. Part of its significance is reminding Congress that we can still act in this area and get things done, and hopefully giving us the confidence to keep on going and not make that our last act in, this was the first time we passed something in nearly 30 years. We had we had the PACT Act for veterans who were exposed to burn pits and had been ignored, frankly, by their government and their own VA, saying those respiratory illnesses you have, they're not service connected. Well, we've changed that, and people are now getting the health care as well as the disability benefits that they deserve. Huge step forward in terms of getting that equitable health care and that equitable result. We passed the CHIPS and Science Act, which is helping us, shorten our supply chains and bringing some good paying jobs back and making sure that we are not dependent upon just a handful of companies for things that are critical to our security, our safety, and our public health. And then the Inflation Reduction Act, which on the healthcare side finally stood up to the big pharmaceutical companies and said, we need to be able to lower the cost of prescription drugs for Americans who cannot afford them, who are choosing between paying for groceries and taking the medicines they need. And part of that is by having Medicare finally negotiate, just like every other industrialized country. You probably all live in a country where they bargain for better prescription drug prices. But those who are still left on US soil don't have that. It's happening now because Democrats stood up. But also that bill was the boldest action we have ever taken to fight climate change, with the investments in clean and renewable energy and the pivot from fossil fuels that needs to take place. And while it's not enough, again, it's the boldest we've ever done, and probably with the estimates of somewhere between 30 to 40% reduction in carbon by 2030 because of those investments, it sets us on a hopeful path that we have that has eluded us before then. So if we don't run on those pieces of progress, pieces of legislation, what's wrong, right? There's been some bold accomplishments. We'll never, as Democrats, be satisfied that it's enough, and it's not. But boy, do we have a lot to share with our constituencies as we try to mobilize the vote. And Biden is our leader on the top of the ticket. He made those victories possible. It is a bolder set of achievements in the first 2 years of a presidency than we can say going back to Johnson or even, the New Deal. It is amazing, and we ought to be behaving like we've just done some amazing work.
All right. Our next question is from our Wisconsin state team. Annie Brawl from Spain, please ask your question.
Hi, Senator Baldwin. Happy Pride and Happy Dairy Month. My name is Annie Brawl, and I'm a leader of the Wisconsin state team. I live near Barcelona, and I vote in Door County. And I loved your last comments about all the good things that have been done, and I feel bad asking now a bit of a downer of a question.
No,
but
go ahead.
as you said, we can never confuse progress for victory. And so I wanted to ask about Sackett versus the EPA, the recent Supreme Court decision that really limited the coverage provided by the Clean Water Act. Wisconsin is a state with water all the way around, dotted by lakes and crisscrossed by rivers and streams, and many of those waterways are going to be impacted by this decision. So my question is whether Congress can and will re-enshrine the protections as they did with the Respect for Marriage Act.
Yes. Well, thank you for that question. And yes, as a Wisconsinite, water is always on my mind. I was giving the faucet example with all of our threats to our drinking water and our drinking water systems, but we are always reminded that we have 3 coasts in Wisconsin. Our east coast is the Lake Michigan, our north coast is Lake Superior, and our west coast is the St. Croix and Mighty Mississippi rivers, and we have a lot in between those coasts. The Sackett decision was obviously a huge setback after we thought we thought we had made some progress. And this is an issue, by the way, that has been litigated and litigated and litigated. In fact, I think it's the Sackett family, same Sackett family, who's probably been in and out of court for decades. I don't know how long it's been. But that said, I will confess I have not read every word of the Supreme Court opinion, but I do understand that they both left the door open to Congress acting again. So not doing it by administrative rulemaking, but instead an act of Congress to re-strengthen, is that a word, re-strengthen? To again bring the Clean Water Act back to its full strength. That'd be another way of putting it. But also room for states to act. So I think I read that it didn't preclude state action that would be tougher than the Clean Water Act as it currently stands. Now, I want to say, Annie, that we're from a state right now that our legislature is not because of gerrymandering, by the way, is not the boldest in terms of environmental protections. However, it's hopeful that the Supreme Court did recognize the state's ability to act in this area and perhaps act beyond the provisions of the Clean Water Act. And it is also hopeful in our state that someday we will get rid of the gerrymandered map and we'll be able to actually have a state legislature that reflects the political divisions in the state. In other words, at least 50-50, and that we might someday get to the point where we have a legislature that can again start protecting our environment. So it's not today, but just the fact that the Supreme Court left open those paths provides some hope that this isn't going to forever be the law of the land. I think the fact that they left over a congressional path is hopeful, but with a Republican House of Representatives and the need to overcome a filibuster in the Senate, this is probably something that we should be looking strategically at working on over a series of years, but starting now.
Hey, our next question is from another Wisconsin voter whose nickname is Lizconsin. Liz, do you want to ask your question?
Thanks, Angela. Thanks, Senator Baldwin, for coming today. I'm a District 1 voter, and we're so pleased to have you. Our question today was actually written by a fellow Asia Pacific Representative, Michael Ramos, who is a member of the Veterans and Military Families Caucus. And thank you for mentioning the PACT Act earlier. Those improving healthcare benefits for veterans is one of the many things on our list because thousands of veterans living abroad have service-connected disabilities. And those veterans still receive treasury checks in the mail from the VA. The VA has been saying for years that they will move to an electronic reimbursement system for overseas veterans who are enrolled in the Foreign Medical Program, FMP, but it still hasn't happened. So today we have an ask, and that is, will you please be our champion in sending a letter to Secretary McDonough and ask him what is the current status update on the VA moving to this direct deposit system of payment reimbursements for veterans abroad?
I love that question and I like that challenge, and I would be happy to do that. And we just have to make sure we get the follow-up so I can get you a copy of the letter when we've done it. But it seems to me that the VA is experiencing a lot of challenges in getting into the digital age. We've seen that on healthcare records, and the challenge of converting to a new system that is that has a smooth handoff from from active military duty to veteran status. And now, as you're informing me, we're having that problem with something as simple as direct deposit. So I appreciate your raising that to my attention, and I would be happy to articulate that concern to the VA secretary.
And our last question is from Bob.
Me again.
Yeah.
So we would really be remiss if we didn't ask a question that's specific to Americans abroad generally. And this one is proposed by people over at our taxation task force. But don't worry, it's not about taxes.
Okay.
Americans abroad suffer from a whole wide range of unintended consequences simply because we're frequently forgotten during the legislative drafting process, whether it be at the federal level or the state level. And this particularly impacts us when it comes to voting rights, when it comes to taxation, when it comes to Medicare portability, when it comes to Social Security, a whole range of issues. So there's a bill over now in the House. It's HR 2729. It's called the Commission on Americans Living Abroad Act of 2023, which would set up a 2-year commission to explore and recommend legislative fixes to help Americans abroad. So let's say, miracle of miracles, it passes the House. Once introduced into the Senate, would you co-sponsor it?
Oh, that sounds like something that's right down my alley. So obviously, I want to say I want to read it first and take a look at it, but certainly the values embodied there are in line with my values. And the other thing I would say is, you know, I have a number of, well, I'll give you a number of friends who have spent most of their careers overseas and, you know, are now back in Wisconsin or back, you know, when I get to interact. But also I know a number of people with dual or even multiple citizenships. And what's really interesting for me to hear from those people in particular is the difference between how the US and the other country from whom they might hold citizenship, how different it is in terms of access to the ballot box. So one of my good friends is has both a US and an Australian citizenship, dual citizenship, and how easy Australia makes it for you to vote when you are not present in Australia. And frankly, it's not just easy, but it has to be because there's an expectation and maybe a small fine if you don't vote. You know, they have huge participation. I'm not suggesting that we start fines if you don't vote, but I do think that why can't you just walk into any embassy, U.S. embassy or consulate, right? Why not? And so look at the creative things other countries have done to assist their citizens abroad and incorporate some of those ideas. So I'd like, you know, I maybe even go beyond what's in that House resolution. And when we think about ways to make it easier to participate in our democracy, no matter where it is you live.
That's great. You know, Senator Baldwin, we've just had our annual meeting in Washington, D.C., which we do every couple of years when we're not in Costa Rica or other mandatory locations that we must visit to convene. And we did take the opportunity to visit various congressional offices and really share our stories, because I think that those are so impactful. Yes. A lot of those are stories about how it is in one country that we live in versus in the United States. So I really appreciate the interest in how things work in other countries, because that, you know, that's our life. That's how we live. And that's one of our contributions. So thank you so much. for being with us today. And we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and to dig into all these questions. And we're really thrilled to be with you to be enfranchising voters abroad. And we also want to thank you in your capacity as Labor HHS Appropriations Chair for all the work your office has been doing to help our Medicare Portability Task Force, which is working to get an international Medicare pilot program started.
Right.
So thank you so much.
Yeah.
And,
Thank you.
Yes, and wish you a really wonderful rest of your day with all your colleagues. And we will definitely be knocking on your door again next year.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye. Great. So for all of you who are with us today, as the senator told us, it makes a difference when we speak out about our lives and the need for equality legislation. And you can support the work of Democrats Abroad by donating. DA is up to big things in the 2023 and 2024 cycles, and your support can make a difference. And we'd also love to have your support as a volunteer. There's already been links I've seen in the chat from the Wisconsin State team, and you can be an ally or a Wisconsin voter. You can get in touch with the LGBTQ Caucus at our email address, lgbtqqcaucus@democratsabroad.org. And you can also sign up at democratsabroad.org/volunteer to get involved. And first-time volunteers are very welcome. And with that, we'll be ending the call. Thanks again to the senator and to everyone who took the time to join us today on our third annual webinar with Senator Tammy Baldwin. Bye-bye. Have a great rest of your day.